What's up, guys? Matt here with Project Unbroken, and today I'm going to talk about alcohol, alcohol abuse, alcohol addiction, alcohol dependence, and the difference between the three of them. Stay tuned. So guys, a lot of you know, if you've seen any of our videos where Greg and I talk about our drug of choice, booze was my go-to. I started drinking at a pretty young age regularly. So I had my first drink ever. I think I was like 3 years old. Long story, somebody gave me a beer and I ended up drinking the whole thing, and who knows if that had anything to do with what came down the path. But by the time I was 12 or 13, I was getting drunk on a weekly basis for the most part. Then that's about as often as I could get alcohol. I'm sure I'd have been drinking more if I could have gotten my hands on it. But weekends, me and my friends, we would try to get to somebody's house and camp out and drink a bunch of beers until we didn't remember anything. And through that period of time, I think it's really dangerous, as a young teenager, to have that kind of influence take over at such a young age, because it's a really important, vital time when you start to develop your coping mechanisms and your social awareness skills. And alcohol, for me, kind of completely took that over. But today I wanted to talk about, my experience with alcohol abuse and alcohol addiction. I wanted to talk about alcohol dependency, and I think there's a lot of confusion between these terms and with alcoholism in general. And just to be clear and straight up and honest, I don't think there's really you can't nail any of these terms to a person, and you can't define any person by any of these terms. So I feel like there's a lot of stuff on a sliding scale here, and you have to, if you're looking at yourself, be very honest and accountable with your actions and your habits. And if you're watching this because of somebody you care about, I think there needs to be a level of honesty in that discussion as well. So I know that, when I was going through my problems with drinking, that eventually turned into, it was the gateway drug for me, that turned into using harder drugs like cocaine and eventually heroin. A lot was going on. There was different points in my life where I used alcohol in different ways, and it was always kind of as a tool to manage emotions or social interactions and the way that I felt through those social interactions. So, like I said, at an early age, I was drinking and I had a lot of fun with it, and I felt like it, lowered my inhibitions. I had, as most teenagers do, some issues with self-esteem that kind of seemed to disappear with the alcohol. So, of course, when you don't know any better and something seems to fix an issue that easily, you're just going to go right at it. And that's what I did. And the party scene through high school and what should have been college was just fueled by alcohol. And, again, the way these terms are written out, your habits or the side effects because of these habits, it's all really confusing. But I would have definitely considered myself an alcoholic at the time, because when I drank, I decided to drink a lot. And, I didn't, but I wasn't the type of alcoholic that needed to drink every single day or anything like that. But when I was going out, I was getting hammered, and that was my goal, and that's what I intended to do. So when I started looking into these different classifications for these different levels of alcoholism, some things became a little bit more clear to me about my past with drinking. So, as it's defined, alcohol abuse is using alcohol too often or too much, in a very general term, but it's binge drinking to a point that you're starting to see some negative effects in your life. So social interactions might be going south. Relationships are being damaged. You might make some really terrible decisions like inciting violence or drinking and driving or something like that. The next step on the list is alcohol addiction, and that's when you see these negative effects from alcohol abuse coming into your life, but you can't stop yourself from drinking. So even though you're aware that this is starting to have a negative effect on your overall well-being, you continue to drink. the next step after that is alcohol dependency. And so this is where you're actually having a physical dependency to the drug alcohol. And if you don't have alcohol, you're going to experience withdrawal symptoms. And alcohol withdrawal can be really dangerous. For some people, lead to death. You can go through delirium tremens, or you have the shakes, and it can lead to seizures. And there's a lot of really bad effects with the alcohol withdrawal that I have not experienced personally. So again, I think alcohol dependency you do not have to be addicted to alcohol, and to be addicted to alcohol, you don't have to be alcohol dependent. So again, everybody has their own relationship with this thing, and I think alcoholism is very interesting because of that fact. Some alcoholics need to drink every single day. Some alcoholics can drink once a month, but when they drink way, way, way too much. So there's no clear-cut label for, any type of drinking or the way that, anybody abuses alcohol. So again, for me, as I was kind of going through it, I had a really tough time, figuring these terms out for myself, because they are kind of vague, and I kind of saw a little bit of the way that I drank in all of those terms. For instance, when I drank, I definitely drank to a point where it was causing negative consequences in my life. So some of you guys know I have had 2 DUIs. One that, I wrecked my car, and it was pretty bad. Luckily, it was a single car accident, but I totaled the car, and it was not a good situation for me at all, clearly. 2 DUIs, a bunch of different fights. So, when I used to binge drink like that, I would tend to take things too personally, and it a lot of times led to violence, and I was arrested several times for drinking and fighting. So there's kind of the alcohol abuse, where I would drink to get drunk, and saw some real negative effects because of that. Then, there's definitely some signs of alcohol addiction when I look back on my drinking history, especially after my second DUI. After the first DUI, I think I knew, all right, this is starting to become an issue. But after my second DUI, I really knew, all right, this is kind of ruining your life now. And because of that second DUI, I had to spend some time in prison. I had to spend some time on house arrest. Of course, I lost my license both times, and it really was throwing the wrench in my path to success. Not that there was one back then by any means, but I knew that it was screwing up my life pretty good, but I continued to drink. And while I never experienced any physical withdrawal from alcohol, I feel like I was dependent on alcohol to behave in a way that I thought was ideal in social situations. So, for instance, for a while I was bartending and waiting tables, and I would feel the need, and I just straight up would drink before my shifts. Not a lot, but just enough to kind of take off the edge, so I could, comfortably talk to strangers and interact in a busy social environment without feeling really nervous. And I feel like this was due to the fact that I spent most of my teenage years developing my social skills around alcohol. So I didn't really have any other coping mechanism for, what people, I guess, would call social anxiety, or just being nervous, being around a bunch of people that I don't know and having to, hold a conversation. And it was bizarre, because I knew the negative effects of alcohol, especially as I started to pay for them with getting arrested and spending time in court, and kind of getting myself into that revolving door or vicious cycle of alcoholism. I knew of what it was doing to my life, but when I would go to be in a social situation, the feelings of anxiety or whatever negative thoughts I had, it was so overwhelming. I was like, I can't do it without a drink. I needed that to kind of curb that base level of anxiety. Greg and I, in our videos, if you guys watch some of the other ones where we talk about what brought us out of our heroin addiction, it's really the same thing that brought me away from my alcohol addiction or alcohol abuse or alcohol dependency, wherever that landed for me, a lot of those negative effects started to go away as I, got a handle on my heroin addiction. So the two stories, for me at least, kind of run parallel with each other, because alcohol was always in the background of my heroin use. If you guys have seen that video, you guys know that I started, as my maintenance program for heroin addiction was kind of weaning off. I was using Suboxone. As I started to come off of that, I started to implement a lot of exercise, and I started improving my diet strictly in an effort to help, a more natural production of dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, like those feel-good chemicals. I knew that I wasn't going to be getting them anymore from heroin or from Suboxone. So I started putting these habits in place in an effort to, try to naturally make myself feel better. And for me, it had a really profound effect. So I actually started exercising while I was on house arrest for my second DUI. And it was cool. It worked faster than I expected it to work. So I was still smoking cigarettes at the time. Again, I was still drinking a pretty good amount. I started to kind of dial it in as, I started to work on my Suboxone taper. But I had a couple things in the basement, some free weights, and I drew up like a small little circuit workout. I had no idea what I was doing at all, like none. And I just went down there and kind of just started lifting weights. It was, maybe a half hour, and I wouldn't say that I did anything that was strenuous by any means at all, but I got the blood pumping, so to speak, and I got moving around, and I got done. I felt pretty good about it. I don't know. It was just this feeling, and again, I guess I do know it was probably endorphins and dopamine. Those are the two you really get from exercise, and it felt awesome. I went right after and smoked a cigarette and was proud of myself for working out. And then the next day, I did the same kind of thing, similar routine. I didn't really know much, but it started to catch on. And just day by day, I would do a little bit more, do something different. And I started feeling good about myself. And I started to think that I was getting more results than I was probably actually getting. But I think the important thing here is I started to look at myself with some level of self-respect. My self-esteem started to improve a little bit. I started to talk to other people about lifting weights, and I started to look at myself as somebody who exercised and somebody who was healthy. And I'm not sure how this shift started to happen, but I slowly started making decisions based off of the person that I was talking about myself as. So I started making decisions off of somebody who lifted weights instead of somebody who smoked cigarettes and drank too much booze. I started to think of myself as somebody who was becoming relatively healthy instead of somebody who was a heroin addict and an alcoholic. I completely shifted my focus away from thinking that I was somebody who was inadequate or a drunk or a junkie and unhealthy, and I started looking at myself as somebody who was becoming healthy, somebody who was making good decisions for their future, somebody who, could kind of chop it up about diet and exercise. And somewhere along the line, I just became that person. And I think that's something that I struggled with for a really long time, was self-identifying as, a drug addict or an alcoholic. And I just kept behaving like a drug addict or an alcoholic. And when I started to just put these new, healthier habits and behaviors in place, I started to look at myself no longer as a drug addict or an alcoholic, but as somebody who was healthy and, doing okay for themselves. Now you look 10 years later and I own a gym. That's a really successful gym. I love what I do. And people come to me for advice about lifting weights and eating better. And it's funny for me to look back on it, because I think back 10, 12 years ago and I just don't even recognize that person anymore. So, for now, like when people find out a little bit, and Greg and I are very open about our past with drinking and drugs, they can't believe it. Some of them catch these videos and they're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea that you were a heroin addict or you were an alcoholic and you did all this stuff." And I think that's because I have a hard time believing it too. And that's strictly because, again, I stopped looking at myself like the alcoholic or like the drug addict, and I started looking at myself like the dude who was in shape and was healthy. And just subconsciously or internally, I started to change the direction, or I started to make better decisions because I was making decisions based off of a person that I had more self-esteem in, or I had more belief in, and my self-esteem was higher, and I wanted to do better things for that person. I know I'm kind of talking like I have two personalities, but sometimes I feel like I do, especially because I was able to make this drastic change, and only because I instilled a couple healthy habits into my life that, again, it started with 20, 30 minutes a day, and slowly it just kind of took over my whole subconscious, and I just changed my decision-making process in a pretty short period of time. When we get comments or emails from people and they're saying that, it's either there's an issue with drinking or drugs or both, and they say, I'm going to quit, I'm going cold turkey, or, I'm going to get off of Suboxone or whatever. There's some slight feeling of discomfort in me because I know that when I tried to quit like that, and by that I mean, everything remains the same except for I'm just going to stop doing something, i.e. drinking or drugs. It never worked for me because I still, in the back of my mind, kind of looked at myself as the alcoholic or the drug addict that was just going to try to quit again. And I think the only thing that really allowed me to be successful in this whole journey was the fact that I started doing something new. So it wasn't necessarily that I was quitting something that led me to find success. It was that I started something new that I slowly fell in love with and became passionate about, and that it caused me to want to make better decisions in my life. I know now that if I go back to binge drinking, if I go back to using heroin or pain pills or whatever, it's going to completely derail all the progress I've made in my life doing things that I truly love doing and that make me feel good about myself. So it's just such a reinforcement that I can't imagine myself going back down that road, and I have zero fears or doubts about my continued success. And I hope that doesn't come off as, like cocky or whatever, because I know how powerful drinking and drugs can be and the damage they can do to anyone. But just the shifts I made in my thinking, I don't see any pull for me going back to that kind of lifestyle. It's just, I think like a different person now. And when I think of myself, I don't think of myself as somebody that would do those sorts of things. And I just kind of brainwash myself into being a healthier, happier person in a weird, roundabout way. A lot of what Project Unbroken is about is Greg and I kind of reverse engineering the success that we found with being able to not only quit drinking, quit heroin and everything else, but also lead that into a successful life where, we both are happily married with kids, and we both own successful companies, and, we have a lot of freedom and time to do things that we really enjoy and to, try to better the lives of us and our families. So we want to reverse engineer all that and show you guys kind of what we did, even by accident. I think if we can explain to you what helped us, it might take you a lot less time than it took us kind of fumbling around in the dark and, essentially maybe getting lucky and finding our way to where we're at now. So that's, again, the whole meat and potatoes of what Project Unbroken is about, and that's why Greg and I continue to make these videos, again, in hopes that somebody out there might learn something from what we did right or what we did wrong, and make it work for them. So Guys, I really appreciate you watching. Greg and I both appreciate all the love that we've been getting from you, the likes, the comments, the subscriptions. It all just, makes us glow. So thank you for that. If you guys are not following right now, please hit that subscribe button. I promise you that the content we have coming is definitely going to be helpful for you or somebody you love if you're struggling with this addiction. And let's not joke around, like everybody is affected by this in one form or another, whether it's you or a loved one. Everybody goes through it. So we would love for you to stay tuned. If you guys have anything that you want us to speak on specifically, leave a comment or hit us up on our website at www.projectunbroken.com, and we're going to absolutely get around to it. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I look forward to talking to you soon. See ya.